We live in an age where we can live stream high-definition video from a spacecraft orbiting hundreds of kilometers above Earth, yet we still struggle to hold uninterrupted eye contact at the dinner table. We've split the atom, mapped the human genome, and peered across cosmic time to witness galaxies forming just after the Big Bang. And yet, for all this knowledge of the external universe, we remain unsettled by the internal one. How can a species capable of detecting gravitational waves still wrestle with the question, who am I? This is not a failure of science or shortcoming of our tools. It is a dislocation of context. We've developed machines that can learn, algorithms that can anticipate human behavior, and sensors that can detect a candle flame from orbit, but somehow billions lie awake, not in awe, but in quiet existential anxiety. Not because we lack data, but because data doesn't answer meaning. The trajectory of civilization has been outward toward the stars, toward speed, toward scale, but our understanding of ourselves hasn't kept pace. We know how black holes bend light and how time dilates near the speed of light, yet we falter in understanding the gravity of our own emotions. We've chased mastery over nature but neglected the stewardship of our inner landscape. And now, with so much distraction thinning, the constant feed of curated information, the manufactured outrage, the predictable cycles, something subtle begins to happen. The illusion doesn't collapse with spectacle, it unravels with quiet inevitability. And as it does, we begin to sense not in our intellect, but in the background noise of consciousness that something long obscured is becoming visible. Not because a new truth has been delivered, but because an old one is reemerging. And the question arises not as a slogan, but as an honest inquiry. What exactly are we beginning to see? They're beginning to see that the structures they inherited, educational systems, economic frameworks, cultural expectations, weren't necessarily designed with their liberation in mind. These were not the outputs of some universal equation striving toward human fulfillment. Rather, they were the byproducts of historical inertia systems that persist not because they are optimal, but because they are unchallenged. When we tell students to memorize facts instead of question assumptions, when we define identity by statistics and strip nuance into categories, we are not educating, we are encoding conformity. Media, once a window into the world, increasingly functions as a lens that shapes which parts of reality are amplified, which are cropped out, and how one is instructed to emotionally respond. Politics in this equation becomes less about governance and more about the preservation of narrative gravity where truth is no longer discovered, but manufactured for ideological stability. And individuals trapped within this gravitational field of norms and notifications begin to feel an unsettling cognitive dissonance. Life starts to resemble a performance more than a process of discovery. You wear a mask that itches because it doesn't align with your biology. You follow a script that was written by people long gone, shaped by economies and ideologies that assumed your compliance. And yet, deep within the noise, something resonates not new, but ancient. A signal buried beneath the clutter. Not a mystical voice, but a physiological one. Your neurons, your instincts, the evolutionary architecture of your brain, all quietly reminding you of something fundamental. That consciousness is not merely awareness, it is participation. You are not here to watch the universe. You are here to interact with it, to shape it, to be shaped by it. The veil then was never external. It was constructed from assumptions woven from fear, dyed in expectation. And now, as the veil thins, the real question is not, what is the truth? But rather, now that I see more clearly, what am I accountable for? Because awareness by its very nature carries weight. In physics, we understand that observation affects reality not metaphorically, but measurably. At the quantum level, the act of observing a particle changes its behavior, its position, even its state. Similarly, in the realm of human consciousness, becoming aware alters your trajectory. To know is to be unable to unknow. To perceive is to become responsible for what that perception reveals. Blaming external systems may offer temporary catharsis, but it doesn't alter the architecture of those systems. The universe doesn't reward outrage. It responds to equilibrium. to pattern, to resonance. So the task becomes not how loudly one can protest, but how clearly one can align. Do we restructure education so it cultivates questions instead of compliance? Do we design technology to enhance empathy rather than engagement metrics? Do we redefine success not by capital acquisition, but by contribution to complexity, sustainability, and wonder? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the new constants in an evolving equation of civilization. And as the veil falls away, not from collapse, but from cumulative inquiry, what emerges is not chaos, but clarity. You begin to understand that the matrix you thought you were escaping is simply an outdated interface. What's required now isn't rebellion, but evolution. Not escape, but emergence. Not disconnection from the world, but a reintegration into it with new parameters, new perspectives, and a deeper calibration between your biology and your beliefs. The light you see is not coming from some external source of revelation. It's a reflection of your own awareness, finally reaching escape velocity. You've heard it before, though perhaps not in words more like a pattern, a pulse, a subtle gravitational pull nudging you toward coherence. It's not mystical, it's measurable. Your circadian rhythms entrain to solar cycles. Your heartbeat synchronizes under the influence of geomagnetic fluctuations. Your very DNA responds to light, temperature, and electromagnetic fields. Beneath the digital static and socio-cultural programming, there remains a biological symphony trying to return to its native rhythm. But this voice, this inner signal, has been filtered out by generations of external authority. From the moment language was assigned to your thoughts, you were trained to listen outward, to the parent, the teacher, the institution, the screen. And so the internal voice was demoted, rebranded as imagination, rebellion, or worse, irrelevance. The result? A civilization of individuals fluent in protocol but illiterate in intuition. Yet just as cosmic background radiation still hums as a faint echo of the Big Bang, your internal signal never vanished, it merely became faint beneath the din. In moments of silence, solitude, or awe, staring at stars or listening to the ocean, this signal sometimes breaks through, not with volume, but with clarity. It doesn't shout, it harmonizes. And in that moment, you're not learning something new. You're remembering something ancient, something encoded in the stardust of your cells. Because in astrophysics, we speak of resonance, the phenomenon by which aligned frequencies amplify one another. This is how galaxies form, how matter organizes, how the universe sings itself into structure. And it's how meaning arises in a human life. When your actions align with your awareness, when your behavior resonates with your values, you don't need direction. Direction finds you. The irony, of course, is that the deeper you tune inward, the more profoundly connected you become to everything outward. This isn't philosophy, it's physics. Your thoughts are not isolated events. They are electrochemical signals influencing neuroplasticity, shaping perception, reinforcing behavioral feedback loops. When you operate out of sync, when your inner signal is distorted by fear, shame, or dissonance, your interactions suffer, your choices misalign, and your reality destabilizes. But when you return to resonance, to coherence, to inner clarity, you begin to function like a tuning fork in the larger field of human experience. Others respond not to your volume, but to your frequency. And so a new kind of responsibility emerges, not imposed by external authority, but implied by the very structure of consciousness itself. What signal are you transmitting? Because make no mistake, your frequency is always on. Whether you speak or remain silent, act or abstain, you're influencing the field around you. Fear carries a frequency. So does integrity. So does compassion. And the universe responsive, reactive, relational matches tone for tone like a physical law yet to be fully described. So if you want to alter the world, start not with protest or performance, but with the signal you broadcast through your state of being. Ask yourself, what am I resonating with today? Is it anger? Is it wonder? Is it truth? Or is it convenience disguised as certainty? Because like particles in a collider, the thoughts and emotions you energize don't just stay inside you. They generate collisions, reactions, trajectories. And over time, those trajectories form the orbit of your life. Reality, then, is not simply observed. It is sculpted down signal at a time. The voice within you, the one that's been drowned out by algorithms, by schedules, by cultural script and shit, doesn't need awakening. It needs attention. It doesn't speak in slogans or declarations, but in patterns of intuition, subtle shifts in perception, quiet recognitions that something about your current trajectory is out of alignment with the deeper architecture of who you are. And the moment you begin to listen on casually, but with scientific curiosity, you discover something profound, that the universe has never stopped communicating with you. The same principles that govern stellar formation, fluid dynamics, or electromagnetic resonance are mirrored within your own consciousness. When you begin to listen to yourself not as a collection of habits, but as a field of influence, the laws of reality don't change, but your position within them does. You stop reacting reflexively and start responding consciously. You begin to filter less and perceive more. The observer effect takes on new meaning, not just in particle physics, but in your choices, your relationships, your contributions to the shared narrative of humanity. And from this shift, the myth of the default life begins to unravel. The idea that existence must follow a script: birth, school, job, mortgage, retirement becomes less like a fact and more like a relic of an outdated operating system, because the universe, as far as we can tell, doesn't do default. There is no standard galaxy, no template for stars, no blueprint for minds. It thrives on variation, on emergence, on probabilities resolving into form through interaction. So why should human lives be any different? To try and make 7 billion minds conform to a linear narrative is not civilization, it's compression. And eventually, compression breaks pattern recognition. It blocks signal. It reduces meaning. And that's when people stop evolving and start merely repeating. But repetition is not the same as stability. In physics, systems that loop without change tend toward entropy. They degrade, unravel, collapse. The same holds true for societies and for individuals. When we confuse predictability with safety, or uniformity with progress, we stall the very evolutionary mechanisms that nature depends on: adaptation, complexity, responsiveness. The so-called default life may feel comfortable because it's familiar, but familiarity is not a measure of truth. It's a byproduct of exposure. And when exposure is shaped by forces more interested in control than curiosity, what you end up with is a civilization optimized not for awareness, but for compliance. Predictability, after all, makes you easier to manage, easier to market to, easier to analyze. But a universe that thrives on entropy and emergence will not support a species that seeks only to conform. Eventually, the system breaks first, subtly, then visibly. The disconnect between the self you perform and the self you sense becomes intolerable. And that discomfort, that's not dysfunction. That's physics. That's signal interference. That's the biological tension between authenticity and adaptation reaching critical mass. When the energy you expend maintaining the illusion of a default self exceeds the energy required to discover who you really are, a transition becomes inevitable. You don't break down, you break open. You begin to question, not as rebellion, but as resonance-seeking calibration. And though the process feels disorienting, confusing, lonely it is not error. It is emergence. Like a star collapsing inward before igniting into supernova, your internal structure reorganizes. And that ignition, that violent rearrangement of inner mass, is not just personal, it's cosmological. It's the universe remembering itself through you. Creation has always been assumed to be something external engineers, draft blueprints, artists, sculpt forms, ecosystems unfold according to evolutionary logic. But rarely do we acknowledge that our very lives, the shape of our thoughts, the rhythm of our attention, the quality of our perception are acts of creation no less intricate than any nebula or biosphere. You are not a passive recipient of reality. You are a participant in its formulation. Your consciousness is not an accident of biology, but a property of the universe, arising from the same field equations that give birth to gravity, electromagnetism, and quantum spin. And just like those forces, it has measurable effects. In physics, we say energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transformed. A thought, while ephemeral, is energy in motion. It fires synapses, stimulates hormones, shifts behavior, and if repeated with intention, lays down neuroplastic pathways that become the infrastructure of your lived experience. This is not mysticism. This is measurable. The more a thought is rehearsed, the more it recruits supporting data, the more it becomes your lens on the world. You do not see things as they are. You see them as you have trained your brain to interpret them. And once you realize this, the question changes. It is no longer what is real, but what reality have I practiced into existence? Your brain is a filter, not a mirror. And like a particle accelerator, your consciousness gathers momentum in the direction you tune it. Every emotion you allow to dominate becomes a field that attracts more of itself. Fear begets vigilance, joy begets generosity, cynicism begets isolation. You are not manifesting outcomes through intention alone. You are engineering probability fields by where you invest attention and belief. And probability over time becomes pattern. Most people don't realize they're doing this because the process is invisible, gradual, and self-reinforcing. They wake up each day and immediately tune in to the external chaos notifications, headlines, emails, allowing the noise of the world to dictate the signal of their mind. This is the cognitive equivalent of entropy. Energy without organization, reaction without intention, and then they wonder why life feels fragmented, unpredictable, devoid of direction. But the truth is, without conscious calibration, your brain defaults to survival heuristics, negativity, bias, social conformity, attention hijacked by novelty rather than relevance. In such a state, your thoughts don't shape reality. They echo the randomness of your inputs. Energy without intention is just noise, and noise over time becomes confusion. To live differently is not to reject science, technology, or structure, but to bring them into conscious alignment, to treat each morning as a recalibration, to begin not by reacting, but by tuning. Ask, what do I want to resonate with today? What kind of force am I becoming? What ripple am I contributing to the field around me? Because clarity in this universe is a force multiplier. When you are clear about your values, your direction, your frequency, you don't just move efficiently, you alter the informational landscape around you. You become gravitational. You attract coherence. You repel distortion. And over time, enough individuals doing this, aligning with intention rather than reaction, will produce not a wave of noise, but a symphony. That's how culture shifts. That's how systems evolve. That's how new worlds are born, not from mass rebellion, but from mass realignment. You don't need to overhaul civilization in a single act. That's not how transformation works, not in nature, not in cosmology, not in consciousness. What you need is to recognize that even the smallest signal you emit on idea, a gesture, a choice of ripple through time, acquires momentum. The atoms in your body were forged in the furnace of ancient stars, distributed through space by supernovae, caught in the gravitational scaffolding of a young solar system, and ultimately assembled into the nervous system through which you now perceive this very moment. You are not just a byproduct of that story. You are a continuation of it. And yet, despite such an epic ancestry, we've been conditioned to feel small, insignificant, as though our choices vanish into the void. But the void isn't empty. The cosmos is responsive, interconnected. It remembers, not in the way a camera remembers, but in the way a field retains the shape of everything that's passed through it. This isn't romanticism, it's physics. Your presence, your very attention alters probability. And when enough people learn to shape that attention, not through reaction, but through disciplined curiosity and deliberate resonance, the system as a whole responds. The myth of powerlessness evaporates because reality was never imposed upon you. It was always participating with you. So the question now is not whether change is possible. The question is, are you tuned to broadcast what that change requires? In the early 20th century, physicists stumbled upon a phenomenon so strange that even Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. Quantum entanglement revealed that two particles, once connected, could influence each other instantly across any span of space without any observable signal traveling between them. For a long time, this idea remained on the edge of credibility and inconvenient anomaly in an otherwise elegant theory. But the data held, and now we know the universe at its most fundamental level is not a collection of isolated objects, but a web of relationships. Interconnection is not metaphor, it is structure. And so it is with us. We've been taught to view ourselves as self-contained minds in skin-bound bodies, pursuing private goals in a world of strangers. But biology, psychology, and even basic thermodynamics all suggest otherwise. With every breath, you exchange atoms with forests, oceans, and the breath of others. With every word, you alter someone's chemical. State their cortisol, their oxytocin, their nervous system's calibration. The choices you make do not end with you. They are inputs in a global field of feedback and resonance. And so to live as though your actions don't matter, as though your silence is neutral, is to misunderstand your very nature. There is no neutral frequency. Even in stillness, you vibrate. Even in hesitation, you broadcast. Your frequency either stabilizes or destabilizes the field you inhabit. And when you accept that, not as a burden, but as an identity, you stop asking, what difference can I make? And start realizing you are the difference expressed in waveform. Responsibility, then, isn't about doing more, it's about perceiving more accurately. The stars don't apologize for their light. The sun doesn't seek permission to emit energy. They express their nature in accordance with the laws of physics, and in doing so, they shape their surroundings. So must you. To exist is to influence. To become conscious of that influence is to step into a different kind of authorship, not over others, but over the signature you leave on the field of reality. That signature is written in behavior, in belief, in presence. The way you speak to a stranger, the way you respond to discomfort, the way you choose in moments of ambiguity to align with coherence or collapse into chaos. Every action is a microcosmic expression of macrocosmic principles. Gravity doesn't choose to be constant. It simply is. Entropy doesn't waver in its trajectory toward disorder. It unfolds predictably unless something intervenes. Likewise, the culture around you will decay into noise unless individuals begin to radiate order, not rigid control, but structured intention. And intention, once amplified by awareness, becomes influence. The kind of influence that doesn't demand attention, but generates gravity. People sense it, they recalibrate around it, not because you preached, but because you resonated. And resonance, once established, spreads. This is not about being perfect. It's about being precise, aligned, honest in waveform. Because someone, somewhere, right now, is adjusting to the tone you're emanating, whether you know it or not. People often speak of a new Earth as if it were a destination, a geographical relocation, or utopian afterthought just over the metaphysical horizon. But that's a misunderstanding of both science and experience. The world out there is not separate from the structures inside your brain. Every photon that hits your retina is processed, filtered, interpreted through the lens of your expectations, beliefs, and prior neural configurations. You do not perceive reality directly. You construct it. And that construction is not fixed. Neuroplasticity shows us that your brain is not a static organ, it's an adaptive system, constantly rewiring in response to stimuli, habits, and attention. So when people awaken, what they're really doing is modifying their internal model of reality. Their perception shifts. Patterns once invisible become obvious. Priorities reconfigure. They stop running the inherited code and begin, slowly, to write new functions. The new Earth is not post-apocalyptic, it's post-assumption. It emerges not when the world burns, but when enough individuals stop projecting outdated mental software onto a living universe. Success is no longer defined by extraction, but by regeneration. Value isn't measured in consumption, but in contribution. Intelligence isn't memorization, it's curiosity in motion. Spirituality, in this new model, is not doctrine, it's the practice of sustained awareness. And this earth doesn't need to be built. It needs to be embodied by people who live in resonance, not just speak of it, who treat each moment as a node of influence, who recognize that freedom is not granted by systems, but revealed by consciousness. The world doesn't change when laws are rewritten. It changes when perception is upgraded. And once that upgrade begins, something fundamental shifts, not just in how you see the world, but in how the world responds to you. You stop waiting for signs, for permission, for institutional reform or cosmic intervention. You realize the revolution you've been anticipating isn't a headline event or a singular moment of disclosure. It's not something done to you. It's something that unfolds through you. The veil, as it turns out, was not a physical barrier. It was perceptual inertia, dense fog made of unquestioned beliefs, of socially inherited defaults, of neural patterns reinforced by repetition rather than truth. And when that fog lifts, not in spectacle, but in gradual, self-evident illumination, you begin to behave differently. You question norms not to rebel, but to realign. You listen more, speak more intentionally, act from clarity rather than impulse. You stop trying to be impressive and start becoming impactful. You don't merely criticize the system. You prototype alternatives in how you work, relate, parent, create. You become not a consumer of culture, but a generator of coherence. You shift from when will it change to what am I changing by how I live today? This is not idealism, it's thermodynamics. Systems reorganize when enough energy is input to disturb the existing equilibrium. You are that energy. You are the local disruption that can become a global resonance, not by force, but by frequency, by refusing to revert to the baseline just because it's familiar, by becoming a reference point of clarity in a noisy informational field. And in doing so, you remind others without words, without slogans, that something else is possible, that the future is not some distant domain. It's coded in the next decision, the next breath, the next act of alignment. So here we are, not at the end of an era, but at the edge of a lens zone that, once expanded, cannot be contracted. You've seen through the veil, not because someone handed you a revelation, but because something within you refused to stop asking the deeper questions. You felt the dissonance between the narrative and the noise, between what you were told to value and what your own inner metrics began to sense was hollow. And now, the world may look the same, the buildings, the systems, the headlines, but you don't. Your internal geometry has shifted. Your perceptual algorithms have been rewritten. You no longer confuse silence with truth, comfort with meaning, or repetition with wisdom. You understand, perhaps for the first time with visceral clarity, that you are not in the universe. You are of it, made from the same elements as stars, governed by the same laws, and participating in the same cosmic unfolding. Your thoughts have inertia. Your choices create wakes. Your presence, calibrated or chaotic, bends the informational field around you. And so the question that now matters most is not what you believe or even what you know. It is, what kind of force are you choosing to be? You need not be perfect. You need not be certain, but you must remain awake to your influence, to your pattern, to your responsibility as a node of consciousness in a web of evolution. Treat your life as an ongoing experiment in presence, in refinement, in contribution. When the old world calls you back into habits of fear, templates of division, rituals of numbness, remember, your loyalty belongs not to inertia, but to potential. Be the anomaly in the pattern, the exception that breaks the rule, the local increase in complexity that triggers a global shift. You don't owe the past your allegiance. You owe the future your example. And if enough of us live that way, not as heroes, but as harmonics, a different world will not need to be declared. It will become self-evident.